to what extent was Jane Austen either the voice for her age or the voice against it? Nowadays, we expect our serious writers to be writing about the political and social events of our times. One almost frowns on a writer who does not show concern for human rights issues or the environment, or does not demonstrate any awareness of social injustice. This can make it very difficult for people to see Jane Austen as a serious writer. Indeed, a few authors have criticized her apparent indifference to the tumultuous events of her time. Mark Twain said that her books madden me so that I can't conceal my frenzy from the reader. Ralph Waldo Emerson very famously commented that Miss Austen's novels seem to me vulgar in tone, sterile in artistic invention, imprisoned in the wretched conventions of English society, without genius, wit, or knowledge of the world. Never was life so pinched and narrow. The objections that they raise do give one pause. In my introduction, I have already discussed Jane Austen's family and the historical background to her life. Even then, I pointed out that she could not possibly have been unaware of the troubled events of the time. Her cousin Eliza lost her husband to the guillotine. Francis and Charles were both at sea fighting the French and Spanish. She had access to the newspapers and books written by such astute commentators of the time as Ben Jonson, as well as the revolutionary ideas of men like Thomas Paine and Edmund Burke. A woman of her superior intelligence must have engaged with these issues. So we have to ask ourselves why she chose to keep these events in the background and refrain from any overt comment on current affairs. Did this mean she was indifferent to the unfolding of these dramatic events? I think we can answer these two questions quite simply. As to why she chose to foreground the personal rather than the political, we must go right back to her core intention when it came to writing. She wanted to entertain, to make people laugh. Her books are comedies, love stories which end happily. Then she also had a natural disinclination to dwell on human suffering, or for that matter, any extreme human emotions. She was a brave as well as a shy person. You will notice that she seldom relates the actual declarations of love by her different romantic parties. These expressions embarrassed her. They are invariably described remotely, and there are very few romantic kisses. It is only in her later novels that she manages to overcome her awkwardness in giving substance to sentimental expressions from her characters, either about one another or even about nature or beautiful surroundings. Persuasion is really special as a novel because this last example of her work has such a lovely articulation of Frederick Wentworth's feelings for Anne. Coming after the torture of her ordeal at his hands, it is a truly beautiful thing. Another important reason why Jane Austen avoided direct mention of the historical events of the time had to do with the way she saw herself as an artist. She felt very strongly that a writer had to have a thorough knowledge of her subject. She actually says as much to her niece Anna in a letter advising her about a story which Anna had written. It is also very obvious to us in the settings of her different novels, which are very much what Jane Austen must have been most familiar with in her own life. She writes about what she knows. The last point I want to mention reflects back to the core value of the 18th century, which Jane Austen so thoroughly embodies, and that is the concept of good sense. As much as one might object to things in your world being unfair, there comes a point where you have to ask yourself how you can possibly change them. I don't think Jane Austen even asked this question. Her common sense told her she should make the best of things, and her religion told her it was her duty to provide her contribution to society within the bounds of the existing system. Then, on top of this, the philosophy of the time called for balance in all things. Jane Austen would have shared with many of her British compatriots a dread of the anarchy and violence which resulted in the upsetting of the order of things in the past. Firstly, in the brutal years after the beheading of Charles I, and more recently in the fearsome events of the Terror during the French Revolution. If Jane Austen wanted to change things, she would have wanted those changes to happen slowly and naturally, and from within. Let us now turn our attention to whether she was unaware of or indifferent to the social injustices of the time. Here we must answer emphatically no. They might be in the background in her novels, but they are decidedly there. She might not be Mary Wollstonecraft, a prominent feminist writer of the 18th century, but she writes with a singular consciousness of the limited options there were for women at the time. Particularly after reading Claire Tomalin's biography of Jane Austen's life, I was absolutely staggered at how several of the women in Jane Austen's family bore child after child until one of the births eventually killed them. Married women were pregnant for 10, 12, 15 years at a time. However, I'm going to leave the women's issue here for the moment because I intend to devote my next talk to this topic. Other social evils of the time are highlighted by Jane Austen, and we know she cared about them because she satirizes them. The worship of status and rank in society, we know she found absolutely contemptible. Later on in Persuasion, Anne is going to defy her father and visit her friend Mrs. Smith in spite of her fallen state in society. Jane Austen herself had befriended the governess of Edward's children and remained an affectionate correspondent with her until her death. Austen also takes pains to expose the lazy, the insincere, and the corrupt members of the clergy. In fact, there are few examples in all of her novels of any really scrupulous and diligent religious characters, possibly only Edmund in Mansfield Park. As far as the actions of the rich are concerned, Jane Austen makes a clear distinction between the effective landlords of the time and those who dishonored the tradition of stewardship that was at the heart of the system of land management prevailing at the time. In Persuasion, Sir Walter is a clear example of a man who has squandered his inheritance and brought shame on his name. His duty had been to make his land productive through effective management of his estate. This was what it meant to be a steward of his property. He has failed in this regard, and Jane Austen makes no excuses for him. Furthermore, while the poorer people seldom make an appearance in her novels, when they are bound to find themselves a natural part of the plot, Austen treats them with distinct sympathy. The nurse, Mrs. Rook, in Persuasion, is treated with respect and kindness by Anne, as are the tenants which she visits on the departure of Sir Walter. One area in which Jane Austen could be regarded to be something of a revolutionary is with regard to her treatment of romance. Geoffrey Wallen of the American Academy for a Liberal Education referred to perhaps the most radical assault on traditional aristocracy ever. That is, her advocacy of love as the basis for marriage. If the idea that character counts in marriage were to gain force, the entire foundation of traditional aristocracy, which depends on the incontrovertible union of blood and wealth, would be undermined more quickly and more powerfully than any rise of a middle class could effect. Of course, Jane Austen still advised prudence with regard to marriage. She knew the importance of money, but she taught the value of a marital relationship founded on deep regard and respect, and discouraged alliances made purely for financial gain, which she thought were ultimately doomed to misery. Where we are so fortunate to be studying her last novel, written as she was maturing with her time and to a certain extent absorbing the ideas of the Romantic period of the early 19th century, we see Jane Austen evolving to present a very different society for our evaluation. Persuasion is somewhat unique in that her hero is not a member of the traditional aristocratic society of the time. In fact, Frederick Wentworth is an example of a meritocrat. He is a self-made man. His skills and abilities and courage and risk-taking make him almost modern in character. He would comfortably fit into a 21st century urban environment, pitting himself against the world with only his talent and guts to secure his success. We share the delight of the Musgrove girls as they are teasingly initiated into the fascinating world of the British Navy, and they, together with Anne, are seduced by the lure of adventure, wealth, and glory on offer to any enterprising and conscientious young Englishman. These people are actually embarking on a career which will reward them in line with their commitment. A very different scenario to that of a baronet feeding off the efforts of his less privileged subjects. Jennifer Fitzgerald writes for the Jane Austen Society of North America. The perspective Persuasion achieves is complex and even paradoxical. The responsible conservative can no longer cleave to the landed gentry, who have so grievously betrayed their trust. She turns instead to the meritocracy of the rising middle class, in this case aptly represented by the Navy. In the end, there is no question that Austen's values are consistently conservative. She is no revolutionary, but her intention is to provide a balanced and responsible ideal for us to consider. To quote the Jasner article, the action of the novel indicates that the upper class has become so corrupt that it stifles at birth any possibility of redemptive stirrings from within. Anne has to leave her own society and seek in the community of sailors a new ambience, the fresh air of an alternative lifestyle.